Hey, this is part 2 of my first ghost. The problem with recording directly from my webcam is, of course, I get 10 minutes to record, and I do not have the option to edit anything. And trust me, you don't want to see me try to edit anything. You will never see these if I try to edit anything. I'm just really not that good at that sort of thing. So I got cut off, and I ran over quite a bit. I want to, instead of leaving you hanging, pick up where I left off and cover where we'd actually gone with that. So I was talking about how I perceive spirits and how I see but with an inner eye and I hear but with an inner ear. And sometimes I get almost like whole movies in my mind playing themselves out. And some of you know that I occasionally show up on a television show called Paranormal State. I work with the Paranormal Research Society, and they will call me in on a number of different cases. Frequently, they're not so good. I know going in that I might be sticking my brain into some pretty horrible stuff. One of those cases was tremendously vivid in terms of the impressions that I picked up, and it is going to stick with me probably for the rest of my life. It was in Kentucky. It airs as the episode called The Anniversary, because through some very strange twist of fate, the dates that we were down there were almost 100 years to the day after this horrible, horrible event. I'm going to call it a brutal rape and murder, but it's of an 8-year-old girl, so there isn't an adjective terrible enough for it. Both the girl, Sarah, and the person who attacked her, who was related to her, he was like a cousin or something, Elmer, they were both still there. And what had happened just played itself out in my mind so very vividly. And the thing is Sarah wasn't an unhappy ghost. I mean, she wasn't living it over and over and over again. It was just the event was still so raw that that's what I tuned into. Because my interactions with Sarah, I really do need to say, just so people aren't feeling terrible for her, she, as a spirit, was there, and she was just trying so hard to be a little girl, to enjoy the childhood that she'd never been given a chance to really live. She was not unhappy. I really think most of this stuff was attached to Elmer, who was this sort of brooding presence on the outskirts of things. But what transpired between Elmer and Sarah played itself out in my mind, and I think the worst part of it was I experienced it switching back and forth between her perspective and his perspective. So I was getting the thoughts and the emotions and the sensations on both sides, and that was really disconcerting. I mean, just being the victim but also the person victimizing all at the same time, that shook me. That really was a lot to stick my brain into, quite frankly. So what that illustrates is it's different. And it can be different depending on the mood I'm in. It can be different depending on how open I am, how strong the impressions are in a place. It's sort of like peeling back layers. You know, the very superficial layer, the first layer I kind of focus in on, especially when I'm doing like an official reading, a walkthrough for, say, Paranormal State, the first layer is just emotion, just what is on the surface, and frequently isn't even connected to ghosts. It's people. It's the emotional energy, the residual energy left by the people who've lived in the house. And of course, the strongest stuff is the people who lived there most recently. When I do a walkthrough, a lot of what I'm doing is kind of acting like a psychic bloodhound. I get on the scent of those emotions, those initial residues, and I try to find the places where people have been most frightened, where they've had the most intense experiences. And in focusing on that sensation, I kind of allow myself to get pulled further and further into my otherworldly perception of the place. It helps with the past, I don't know, half a dozen or more walkthroughs that I've done, that I do them with a blindfold on. Now, I know there's a lot of naysayers out there, and there's a lot of people who are like, oh, you know, all this psychic stuff is just hokey. It's, you know, you get told what's really going on before you walk through and all that stuff. And I'm here to tell you that that's not the case. And I know obviously all the skeptics are going to say, well, that's of course what she's going to say because she's one of those psychic people who thinks they're all cool. But I like the blindfold because it prevents even an unconscious reading of the place. I mean, you walk into a place and unconsciously you make judgments about that just based on the way a house is decorated, based on the knickknacks that are on the bookshelves and the mantelpiece, based on the photos that are on the walls. So if I go into a house and I can't see any of those things, that helps me rule out that unconscious level of kind of cold reading a place. We all read everything cold. I mean, people, places, situations. I mean, really, it's necessary to be able to size things up like that. So the blindfold cuts that whole aspect out for me. So when I go into a place, I'm not going in with an assumption about the economic status of the family and how their emotional state should be based on that. I just go in and I allow myself to dig through those layers and just focus inward, which allows me in a lot of ways to then reach out to what is lingering in the house. And like I said, first it's often the emotional residues of the residents, the living residents, and that often leads me to where there are other things going on. And again, sometimes it's just these vague, nebulous impressions, and sometimes it starts there, and that is like a trail of breadcrumbs, and I follow it deeper and deeper until, like with the anniversary, I have this full Technicolor, Dolby surround sound, whatever bells and whistles you use to make movies really big and immersive these days, just explode in my head, and it's like I'm living it. For those of you who are listening or watching, I mean, think about that, because some of the places that I go, they're not places that you'd really want to live those things. I mean, it's not all bad. Sometimes it's just really delightful little, you know, child spirits. And again, I want to say that Sarah, at the anniversary, she wasn't unhappy. She was very protective. You know, I think she was looking out for other people just to make sure that nothing like that would happen to them ever, ever. So in that respect, you know, she's kind of a little guardian angel through her own experiences, trying to save other people from them. But that would be how I perceive spirits, and a little bit of insight on how I do a walkthrough in Paranormal State. And so I don't run over again, since I'm already at 8 minutes, why don't I let y'all go? Thanks.